A lot happened in today's daf. But specifically, the Gemara had a discussion with regards to the halachis of sirtut. The primary topic of today's daf is hilchas ksivas mezuzah. What emerged is three different shitas of mezuzah, צריכה sirtut. A shita that holds that mezuzah is ein צריכה sirtut. Additionally, it was mavur that tefillin for sure ain't צריכה sirtut. In fact, the Gemara said the hilchasa tefillin loy bayi sirtut. Additionally, we very, very fleetingly mentioned that there's a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos whether a Sefer Torah requires sirtut or whether a Sefer Torah does not require sirtut. The Gemara in Masechtas Megillah daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis, and this is in addition to being very, very pertinent to today's daf, also davar be'itay matay, says that it says in the Megillah, as in Megillah's Esther, Vayishlach Svarim al Kol Yehudim al Sheva ve'esem u'mei Medina Malchus Achashverosh Divrei Shalom ve'emes. So the Megillah's Esther is referred to as Divrei Shalom ve'emes. Amar Rav Tanchum va'amri lo Amar Rav Asi Melami. You know what we learn from those words? Divrei Shalom ve'emes shetzricha sirtut ka'amita shel Torah. That a Megillah requires sirtut ka'amita shel Torah. Rashi says, what does it mean ka'amita shel Torah? K'sefer Torah atzma. Just like a Sefer Torah requires sirtut, so too the Megillah's Esther requires sirtut. Tosfos in Masechtas Menachos daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis, literally on today's daf, asks a kasha on Rashi from another Gemara in Masechtas Megillah, and that Gemara is on daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph. It's 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Chelbei, Amar Rav Chama bar Guria, Amar Rav. Megillah nikras sefer v'nikras igeres. A Megillah, as in the Megillah's Esther, we find that it's referred to as a sefer, and we find that it's referred to as an igeres. Again, one of the last Gemaras we just learned, this nuance between a Sefer and Igeres. Said Rav Chelbei in the name of Rav Chama bar Guria, in the name of the great Rav, that it's Nikra Sefer. You find Megillah Esther is referred to as a Sefer l'may nafkamina she'im tafra b'chutei pishtam psula. That if you would sew together the different urias of the cloth with threads of flax, it would be possible. Because a sefer requires it should be sewn with gidin, right, with sinews. V'nikras igeres, it's referred to as an igeres. Shem hitol ba shloisha chutei gidin kshera. That if you have 3 chutin of gidin, it's going to be kosher. Amar Rav Nachman u'bavad sheyeh mishulash. But you have to make sure that it's going to be mishulash. So Rav Chelbei said in the name of Rav Chama bar Guria, in the name of Rav, that a Megillah, with regards to certain halachas, is treated like a sefer. With regards to other halachas, it's treated like an igeres. L'may nafkamina is treated like a sefer. Just like a sefer requires that you should be toifer the uriyos with gidin, not with chutei pishton, so to Megillah's Esther is the same way. It says Tosfos, you see from this Gemara that we have already a limud that Megillah is nikras sefer, and because it's nikras sefer, it has to be treated like a sefer Torah. If that's the case, why do I need a drasha of Divrei Shalom ve'emes to tell me that Megillah requires sirtut kaamiתה shel Torah, which Rashi explained means like a Sefer Torah? To the extent that a Sefer Torah requires sirtut, I don't need Divrei Shalom ve'emes to teach me that Megillah would require sirtut. I know it from the Gemara daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph that says Megillah nikras sefer, from where I learn other halachas as well, such as Shem Tafra b'chutei pishton psula. So why do I need a drasha of Divrei Shalom ve'emes to tell me that it's like a Sefer Torah that requires sirtut? Tapik layouts, the fact that it's nikras sefer, a bambakash. Says Tosfos, you see from here, that when the Gemara says Divrei Shalom ve'emes, melamed shetzricha sirtut kaamiתה shel Torah, kaamiתה shel Torah does not mean like a Sefer Torah. You know why it doesn't mean like a Sefer Torah? Because the Sefer Torah does not need sirtut, says Tosfos. And that's why, despite the fact that we know that Megillah is Nikra Sefer, and we learn out so many different halachas of Ksivas Megillah from Sefer Torah, you could never learn from there that it requires sirtut. Val Sefer Torah alone doesn't require sirtut. Okay, so now what does the Gemara mean when it says Melamed shetzricha sirtut kaamiתה shel Torah? You know what Amita shel Torah is referring to? It's referring to the mezuzah, says Tosfos. The mezuzah is referred to as Amita shel Torah. And that does require sirtut. Kim mevur heitev on daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis over here in Masechtas Menachos. And by the way, why is a mezuzah referred to as Amita shel Torah? Because what does it say in the mezuzah? You have the first parasha, which is the parasha of Kabbalah's El Malchus Shamayim, which talks about the Amitas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Amitas of the Torah, where a Yid takes a vow to believe Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's why the mezuzah gets this unique toyar. It's referred to as Amita Shal Torah, but the bottom line is the limud of Sirtut by Megillah is taken not from Sefer Torah, it's from mezuzah. So what was the kasha? Why do I need to learn it from Divrei Shalom Ve'emes? Typically, it's the Kras Sefer. Zok Toisvis, Vala Sefer Torah alone doesn't need Sirtut. That's why you can't learn it from the Gemara and Daf Yutes Amud Aleph. What then is the Makar? The Makar is not Sefer Torah like Rashi says in Megillah Tezayin Amud Beis. Rather, the Makar is mezuzah. Mezuzah, the Gemara said, Hilchas Abayis Sirtut, and Megillah's Esther needs Sirtut in the same exact way that a mezuzah is Bayis Sirtut. In other words, what emerges is a major machlokes Rashi and Tosfos, and this is the machlokes that we referenced during the daf, whether Sefer Torah is Bayis Sirtut or Sefer Torah is Lo Bayis Sirtut. Rashi holds that Sefer Torah is Bayis Sirtut, and that's why Rashi said, Divrei Shalom Ve'emes, Melamish Tzricha Sirtut, Kamita Shal Torah, Ki Sefer Torah Atzmai. Tosfos holds that a Sefer Torah is Lo Bayis Sirtut. So what does it mean, Melamish Tzricha Sirtut, Kamita Shal Torah? It means like the mezuzah. But if that's the case, Tosfos Lamaisa asked the Bamba Kasha on Rashi. If a Sefer Torah is Bayis Sirtut, so why do I need the words of Divrei Shalom Ve'emes as the Makar, that a Megillah's Esther requires Sirtut? Typically, it's Nekras Sefer, and we see there's a lot of Hilchas Sefer Torah that are learned out from the fact that it's Nekras Sefer. Rab's Memran, Yotes Amud Aleph, and Masechtas Megillah. Why can't I learn from there too that a Megillah requires Sirtut? Why do I need Divrei Shalom Ve'emes? So it's Yedua that the Brisker Rav in Chedushay Moran Riz Halevi, and this is in Hilchas Megillah, said, Ubehektem, a beautiful diak in the Lashon HaRambam, and this Rambam is in Hilchas Megillah. It's in Perek Beis Halacha Tes. The Rambam says, "Ein koisven es ha-Megillah." You're not allowed to write a Megillah, ela b'dyai, with black ink, ala gvil, oy ala klaf, ki Sefer Torah. So when the Sefer writes the Megillah, he has to follow the halachas of the Sefer Torah. Vim kosfa b'mei afza v'kal kantum ksheira, it's going to be kosher. Kosfa b'shar minei tzavayin and psula, it's going to be possible. V'tzricha sirtut k'teira atzma. The Rambam says that the Megillah requires sirtut like Teirat. The Eina Or Shala Tzarech Avdol Lishma. The Or doesn't have to be processed Lishma, etc. Skipping. Megillah Tzricha Tfira. The Megillah requires Tfira. You have to sew the areas together. Sheyu Kol Oirais Seha. Megillah Achas. All the Oirais should be one long Megillah. The Eina Nitferes Ella beginning Sefer Torah, and it has to be sewn dafka like a Sefer Torah. From Tafa Shalei beginning Psula, etc., etc., etc. So the Rambam over here in Hilchas Megillah, this is not from the first halachas people learn when they sit down, Shloishim Yoim, Koidim Pidim, and they want to learn some Hilchas Megillah, right? Exactly the details of how you write a Megillah. But for us, these are literally the sugis we're holding it in the middle of Masechtas Menachos. This Tosfos is mamish on today's daf. But the bottom line is, so the Rambam gives me a whole Shulchan Aruch of how exactly the Sefer has to go about writing a Megillah. And one of the themes is that it has to be written like a Sefer Torah, right? Ain't koisvenes ha-Megillah ela b'dyai al gvil ayal aklaf k'Sefer Torah. Just reading a few excerpts. V'tzricha sirtut k'Torah atzmo. Ha-Megillah tzricha tfira ad shiyu kol ha'riseh Megillah achas ve'ein nitferes ela b'gidin k'Sefer Torah. So again, because it has to be written like a Sefer Torah, so there's a whole bunch of halachas that flow from there. Said the Brisker Rav. One thing is clear from the Rambam. The Rambam learned the Gemara in Megillah Daf Tezayin Amud Beis. Malamit shetzricha sirtut kamita shel Torah, the way Rashi. Because the Rambam says mefurish that it requires sirtut k'Torah atzma. Right? He keeps on comparing the ksivas ha-Megillah to the Torah, and he says mefurish. V'tzricha sirtut k'Torah. It doesn't take a mezuzah. He says k'Torah atzma. So that's clear, said the Brisker Rav, that the way Rashi learned the Gemara in Megillah Tezayin Amud Beis is the way the Rambam learned the Gemara in Megillah Tezayin Amud Beis is the way Rashi learned it in Megillah Tezayin Amud Beis, and not the way Tosfos learned it in Menachos Lamed Beis Amud Beis. But said the Brisker Rav, there's one diak that jumps off the page, and that is, let's read those 3 lines in the Rambam again very, very carefully. The Rambam says, "En koisvenes ha-Megillah ela b'dyai ala gvil oy ala klaf k'Sefer Torah." Sefer Torah. Emphasis on Sefer. V'tzricha sirtut k'Torah atzma. It doesn't say k'Sefer Torah. Ha-Megillah tzricha tfira ad shiyu kol ha'riseh Megillah achas ve'ein nitferes ela b'gidin k'Sefer Torah. Said the Brisker Rav, why is it when it comes to Diyai and Gvil and Klaf, the Rambam said Sefer? When it comes to Tfira and when it comes to Tfira Begidin, the Rambam said Kisefer Torah. But when it comes to Sirtut, the Rambam's Lashon is V'tzricha Sirtut K'Torah Atzma. Said the Brisker Rav in one line. I think that what you have to deduce from this diak in the Rambam is the Sefer Torah by Sirtut, that a Sefer Torah Gufa requires Sirtut, which is the Makar that a Megillah requires Sirtut. It's not one of the halachas of the Sefer Torah. It's a din in the Torah alain. The Torah by Sirtut. that Torah requires sirtut. Hafla v'fel. Said the Briskerov, the fact that a Sefer Torah has to be written on klaf, the fact that it has to be written al gvil, the fact that it has to be written b'diyai, the fact that the areas need to be sewed together and they have to be sewed together with gidin. These are halachas in the Sefer Torah. There's a Shulchan Aruch of when you're going to write a Sefer Torah, what is that Sefer? What does that Sefer need to look like? What surah does it have to be? What does it have to be made out of? What does it have to feel like? What color should the letters be? Those are halachas that govern the Sefer of the Sefer Torah. The Sefer of the Sefer Torah does not have a din, said the Briskerov, that it requires sirtut. There's no halacha that if you look at the tzura of the Sefer Torah, there should be lines underneath all the words. The Sefer is not mechayev the sirtut. You know what's mechayev the sirtut, said the Briskerov? What's mechayev the sirtut is the Torah alei. There's a din that when you write Torah, forget about Sefer. When you write Torah, you have to make sure that all the lines of Torah that you're writing are going to be underlined. But the mechayev is the fact that there's Torah written. It's not the fact that this is a Sefer Torah. So it's not the Sefer that requires the Sirtut, even though you would think it is the Sefer, because it's part of the Sefer, right? The binding is part of the Sefer, right? No, the binding is a din in the oisius of the Sefer Torah. Ki'ilu, that's what we're saying, right? The Sirtut is not a din in the actual Sefer, but the Sirtut is a din in the Torah. That when I schreibe Torah, when you sit down and you write Torah, so there's a halacha that the way you write the Torah is you have to write the Torah with Sirtut. Said the Briskerov, that's the diak in the Lashon HaRambam, where the Rambam says that regards to al diyoi, gvil, and klaf, it's Kesefer Torah. When it comes to Tfir Begidin, it's Kesefer Torah. But when it comes to Sirtut, it's V'tzricha Sirtut Torah atzma, because it's the Torah that requires sirtut. Said the Briskerov, that's the Lashon HaGemara, Megillah, Daf Tezayin Amud Beis. Divrei Shalom ve'emes, that the Torah are words, the Megillah are words of Shalom ve'emes. Kamash B'ma, that the words of the Megillah are words of Torah. These are words of Torah. They're Divrei Shalom ve'emes. It's the words of Shalom ve'emes. Oh, the words of Shalom ve'emes. Malamish Tzricha Sirtut, Kaamiתה Shel Torah. Torah requires no mention of the word Sefer. Torah requires sirtut. This is going to require sirtut as well. So, what was Tais Kasha? Tais Kasha was, why do I need a Joshua Divish Shalom Vamis to tell me that there's a din sirtut? Teipeklei, I have the Gemara Daf Yotes Amud Aleph, that Megillah is Nekras Sefer, and from there we learn Shem Tafel B'chutei Pishtam Psula, V'chulu V'chulu V'chulu. The Teretz says Megillah Nekras Sefer would teach me that all the halachas of Sefer Torah would be Negei Megillah. But I wouldn't know that the words of the Megillah are the words of Torah. I would know that a Megillah, whatever those words are, need to be written on the same Sefer that a Sefer Torah needs to be written on. Gavaldik. But that the words are Torah, the words Mechatesi. So I wouldn't know yet that there's a din sirtut. Kamash Malon, Divrei Shalom Ve'emes, that the words, Divrei, the words are words of Torah. And because the words are words of Torah, so that's how I know that the Megillah is going to require sirtut. Said the Briskerov, that the emes is, Shekein Advarim Mevuarim Lehedya, B'Yerushalmi Perek Aleph, the Megillah Halacha Aleph. I'll read it inside. Rav Chelboi, read B'Shem Rabbi Elazar. Nemer kan Divrei Shalom Ve'emes, V'nemer Lahalan, emes Kenev Al Timkar. It says by the Megillah, Divrei Shalom Ve'emes. And it says regarding the Torah, emes Kenev Al Timkar. Harei Kamita Shal Torah, says the Yerushalmi. Mazu Tzricha Sirtut. Just like the Torah requires sirtut, avzu tzricha sirtut. Umazu nitno lehidarish. This is so hafaldik. Just like Torah was nitno lehidarish, right? You could darshan Torah, this pshuta shel mikra, and then you could darshan Torah, right? All the midrash Torah nedrash spam. Avzu nitno lehidarish. This is also nitno lehidarish. Said the Briskerov. Harei lehegya midivre mevur midivre Yerushalmi kamosha kosafnu. The hod harei kaamiתה shel Torah lo yala Megillah nemar. It's not referring to the Megillah. Rak al advarim atzmon haksuvim b'Megillah. It's the gay of the words. Shehem kidivrei Torah. That the words in the Megillah are divrei Torah. Ukidenokatla le'inyin shenitnu lidaresh. Because the Yerushalmi put together the Megillah tzricha sirtut with this idea that you can darish in the Megillah. V'kaila Yerushalmi gam ledin sirtut b'hadiach din nitnu lidaresh. Mishum the gam din sirtut b'hachi talya u'kamosh hakasavnu v'hein hein divrei Rambam shakasav the tzricha sirtut ketera atzma. This is what the Rambam meant. Shavas hated Kushis Toysus. Normally the crowd the Vishal of Emish Tzricha Sirtut. V'tepek lei made the grass safer. Lefia na losi shaper. The hod in the grass safer. This that it's called safer. Who ratlin and adin and hatluyim bedin safer Torah. Avu din Sirtut hanemer ala Torah atzma leishamina la mikra to be safer. Rak me akra the divrei shalom ve'emes the hakosov. The Megillah hareyu kedivrei Torah. Mishum hachi hu the tzricha sirtut to kumoishen esbar. Hafla of a fellow. But either way, said Marna Grizz, said the Brisker Rav, that the din sirtut is not a din in Sefer. The din sirtut is the din that Torah requires sirtut. So even though I have the drush already, Megillah Daf Yutet Samad Aleph, that Megillah is Nekra Sefer, that would teach me all the halachas of Sefer would apply to Megillah as well. But as Medaf Habin Sirtut, that's not totally in Sefer. That's totally, these words, are they a chefz of Torah? Are they not a chefz of Torah? Divrei Shalom ve'emes, the words of Shalom and emes. Emes kinev al timkar. Oh, now I know that the words are words of Shalom and emes. If the words are words of Shalom and emes, the words of Torah require Sirtut, these words are going to require Sirtut as well. And that's why the Yerushalmi also in the same exact drush of Divrei Shalom ve'emes learned that the Megillah is nitna li darish. What do you mean it's nitna li darish? You can't darshan verta, you darshan Torah. Torah was nitna li darish. The chiddush of the Megillah is Divrei Shalom ve'emes, that they're words of Torah. Truth is, from a Megillah perspective, it's a fascinating idea. The words of the Megillah are words of Torah. The words of the Megillah are words of Torah. And Torah, b'chol seguloi seha, are included in the words of Megillah, and it's tucked away in this obscure halacha, which is not obscure if you're holding mit with Daf Yomi right now, and that is Divrei Shalom ve'emes, melamid shetzricha sirtut kaamiתה shel Torah.